Israel's Prime Minister has said what he called the intense phase of fighting Hamas in Gaza is nearly over, allowing troops to be freed up to be deployed to Israel's northern border with Lebanon, where fighting's escalated with the Hezbollah armed group. In his first Israeli media interview since the start of the war in October, Benjamin Netanyahu said he expected the ground operation in the southern Gaza city of Rafah to be completed soon. But he said the war wouldn't finish until the Islamist group no longer controls the Gaza Strip. Here's some of what he had to say.
If there is an agreement, it will be an agreement according to our terms. And our terms are not to end the war, to leave Gaza and leave Hamas as it is. I refuse to leave Hamas as it is. We need to eliminate it.
Well, this comes as Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in Washington, where he's holding talks with US officials about the conflict and about President Biden's ceasefire deal. Let's go to our Middle East analyst now, Sebastian Usher, who joins us from Jerusalem. Sebastian, good evening to you there. What does Yoav Gallant want to get out of his trip to the US?
Well, what he wants to get out of, I assume, is support as much as possible from Washington for wherever Israel takes this next, both in terms of what's happening in Gaza, but perhaps even more importantly, perhaps because this looks like this is the next stage, perhaps, of what could be happening in the region, what Israel might do in terms of Hezbollah on its northern border. There has been quite a lot of tension between the Biden administration, it's fair to say, and specifically the Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Netanyahu, in recent weeks. And I think that Yoav Gallant will be trying to smooth that over, but he will also be trying to put the Israeli case forward on these issues. Now, from a perspective of Washington, I think there will be very much an effort by the senior officials that he's going to be meeting to try and give the sense that to take what is happening on the northern border with Hezbollah into an all-out conflict is a danger, a risk that all sides have been warning about for months and months, and that it's something that Israel could actually have very negative consequences from. Lebanon undoubtedly will, the rest of the region, and potentially would bring the US actively into the battle zone. So I think these will be very intense, deep talks. Whether the two sides will actually come to any agreement on where things go next, I think is quite a big question, because there hasn't been recently. But that is very much to do with Mr. Netanyahu and his stance. And I think the Biden administration has undeniably become very frustrated that all the suggestions, all the warnings that it has been making to Mr. Netanyahu don't seem to have been heeded.
Sebastian, as you were talking there, we saw pictures of Yoav Gallant arriving in DC. I think we have a live shot now as protesters have gathered outside the venue in Washington, where Mr. Gallant and Mr. Blinken are meeting. Sebastian, while we still have you, let's talk more about this warning, if you like, from Mr. Netanyahu that the conflict in Israel's north with Lebanon could escalate. How much of a concern is this, not just in the immediate vicinity, but in the wider region?
Massively. I mean, Antony Blinken, the man who's about to meet Yoav Gallant, has made, I think, at least 8 trips to the Middle East since October the 7th. And a big part of those trips have been to go to all the regional capitals, the Arab capitals, as well as to Israel, to try to get as much of a consensus as possible and as much of a kind of driving force in the region as possible to avoid this escalating beyond what is already, of course, a very, very difficult, dangerous and negative situation in Gaza. These are the worst possible fears that would be realized if there was a real upscaling of the skirmishes that have been undeniably intensifying across the border between Hezbollah and Israeli forces, particularly in the past 2 or 3 weeks. This would take both Israel and Lebanon and the region into a whole new dimension. Lebanon, as there have been warnings from Israel, from the military, from its government, could face the same kind of destruction as Gaza has faced. That has been said specifically by leaders in Israel. But also Israel could suffer much worse. I mean, obviously, October the 7th, the massacre was a terrible, terrible moment for Israel. But what Hezbollah is capable of goes far beyond what Hamas has been capable of with its rockets. Hezbollah is believed to have potentially up to 200,000 rockets in its arsenal. Some of those are precision guided, so they could particularly target sensitive areas in Israel. But I think more significantly, there is a potential, at the moment I think this is a huge if that this would ever happen, there is a potential for Hezbollah to launch barrages of up to 3,000 to 4,000 rockets into Israel, across Israel, for weeks at a time if this moved into a dimension of all-out conflict. That would have huge consequences for the people of Israel, and I think there's a great sense of apprehension, not just in Lebanon over what might happen, but amongst the Israeli people.
Okay, Sebastian Usher, our Middle East analyst for us in Jerusalem. Sebastian, thank you. Well, Israel says its fighter jets have struck a number of Hezbollah targets in southern Lebanon overnight. Israel says 2 members of a local security team in northern Israel had been injured, one seriously, by a Hezbollah missile attack. And as we mentioned, Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says troops in Gaza may be redeployed to the border with Lebanon. Israel and Hezbollah both say they are prepared for a wider conflict. As this goes on, Lebanese authorities have denied claims by the British newspaper The Daily Telegraph that Hezbollah has been storing Iranian weapons in the only civilian airport in the country, Beirut International Airport. In response, they organised a tour for journalists and diplomats to the airport to see for themselves. BBC Arabic's Beirut correspondent Karine Torbey was among them.
This is part of a tour of Beirut International Airport. It was organized by authorities to refute reports about Hezbollah storing Iranian weapons here. The claim was made by the Daily Telegraph, citing anonymous whistleblowers who allegedly said that the Shia Islamist group is keeping arms and missiles at the airport.
We think it's just a psychological and media war. You must remember the talk about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. It might be different, but it's part of the psychological warfare. The article is ridiculous and unprofessional.
Beirut Airport is the only civilian airport in the country. In 2006, during the war between Hezbollah and Israel, it was hit. Flights in and out of the country were halted. There are fears today that this could happen again. What could be different this time is that Hezbollah has also threatened to retaliate in kind in case Israel strikes Lebanese strategic positions. And it has released a video it said was filmed by one of its drones showing possible targets in Israel. As threats and counter-threats intensify, the front in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, witnesses constant escalation amid concerns that this could become the main front in the war. Karine Torbey, BBC News, Beirut.